To welcome you to this StrudelmediaLive photo talk to our series, What Moves You. I'm very happy to welcome today's speaker, Gianni Cipriano, who will present his project Politico, and Alan Frame, who will moderate today's talk. My name is Anja Hitzenberger of StrudelmediaLive. We offer online photography classes to people around the world. And I started the photo talk series about 1.5 years ago when the pandemic first hit, to help people in need. And so I want you to know that all of your donations, by registering, you are donating to the Migrant Kitchen Initiative, and they provide meals to people impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm very happy to say that we have raised over $8,000 since we started the talks. And if you're in New York, you can order from the Migrant Kitchen. They now have a location on the upper east side. Their food is really good. Each meal you order will provide a free meal to somebody in need. Gianni and I met at ICP many years ago, and he was also kind of a consultant to get this photo series going. When I first started it, we had a few meetings to figure out how should this all work. And I want to thank him for that, and also give him credit for the name. What Moves You was Gianni's idea. I want to introduce Alan Frame now. Thank you again, Alan, for being the moderator today. Alan is a photographer and writer, and he is based in New York, and he is represented by Gitterman Gallery, which will in next year, 2022, exhibit work from his new book, Fever. Alan was awarded the 2017-2018 Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, and he's also a curator, and he's on the faculty of Pratt Institute, SVA, ICP, and as I mentioned, he teaches for StrudelmediaLive. He graduated from Harvard University, and he grew up in Mississippi. And I want to now hand this over to Alan to introduce Gianni. I want to repeat again, thanks for your donation. Please put your questions into the chat. And the talk will be about 1 hour long. And enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anja. And thanks, Edward Ratliff, for assisting us and facilitating this today. And thanks, Gianni, for being here. And I know you have a really hectic schedule right now, so it's great that you can make time for us. And thank you so much to all of you for coming. I see so many people out there that I adore, and it just seems like a really stimulating thing to be doing on a Friday afternoon. So thanks for being here. I met Gianni last summer in Naples. I was traveling for a couple of weeks after doing a residency in Italy, and went to Naples to meet his partner, Sarah Smarazza, and in the process met Gianni also and photographed them. So at some point, maybe you'll be seeing my pictures of them. Although Gianni went to ICP in the documentary photojournalism program, we never met because I'm in another program and our paths didn't cross. So it was great to meet you, Gianni, and find out about your work last summer, and realizing that you have been so integral to Strudel Media. It's great that we're hearing from you today. Besides working regularly in Europe for the New York Times, Gianni has also been working for L'Espresso, a weekly magazine, since 2013, and doing editorial work for Time, Wired, The Wall Street Journal, Le Monde, The Guardian Weekend, among others. He was born in Sicily. He's lived in the US and Switzerland and Italy. And he's been working on this project that he's going to talk to us today about, Politico, for over 10 years. Right, Johnny?
Almost 10 years.
Almost 10 years. So my intro question is just, how did you get into this work, this series? You started, I believe, after Berlusconi's regime, and at an interesting point in Italian politics. So can you tell us how you got into it?
So first of all, thank you, Alan, for leading this conversation, and thank you, Anya and Edward from Strudel Media, and all of you. There's a lot of people who are online now, and I'm really excited, also a little bit nervous, to be to be honest. So before answering your question, I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay with you. So there are going to be images from the project playing automatically, so that all of you can see what the work is about, and these images can prompt some questions that I will answer during the Q&A at the end of this conversation. So let me just share my screen. So how did I get into this work? I mean, stop me if this goes if the answer goes on for too long, but there are several answers to this question. I started taking the first photographs, the ones that you're seeing here. These are in chronological order, in 2012. And this was 1 year after Berlusconi resigned, and 1 year after we had a technical government in Italy. The reason why I started the project is, well, several reasons. I had returned from New York to Sicily around 2010, 2011. I was at that point very early in my career, where I was kind of struggling and figuring out, what stories, what new projects I wanted to work on. I had one project I had worked on during my stay at ICP, which kind of launched me into the editorial world. And after that, I traveled to Iran, and I had a bad experience in Iran. And when I came back to Italy, I decided that I didn't really want to go abroad and tell stories from abroad, because I felt that, I came to the conclusion that if I really wanted to be honest and sincere with myself, I needed to tell stories that I really and fully understood. And even if I read books before going to Iran and did a lot of research, when I was there, I just realized that, I could have read, tons of books, but because I was not from that place and I really didn't understand the culture that much, there was only, I could only really scratch the surface. So that's when I kind of decided that I really wanted to focus on my own country and on my own culture, starting with Sicily and Italy, generally speaking. So when I came back to Italy, I went back to my small town in the province of Palermo in Sicily, and figuring out, what stories I wanted to work on. And at one point, we were in this political crisis, and I realized that I had this idea, like, instead of focusing on stories and on people who often suffer the consequences of policies, why don't I just do a 180 degrees turn and just, look at who make those policies, and, that means politicians and politics in general in Italy. And one of the ideas was that I wanted to follow the career of a wannabe politician, starting from a small town, doing small campaigns in small squares, and see how that, how that career would evolve, following that politician. I mean, I was not following one specific politician, but my idea was doing a project where I can photograph politics in all its stages, from small squares in small towns in the middle of nowhere up to, the parliament and the Senate in Rome. So in late 2012, I started following the regional elections in Sicily. I had a small portfolio, and I think it was November, December 2012, I went to the photo editor of L'Espresso magazine, which is a weekly magazine in Italy that covers a lot of politics, and said, well, this is how I photograph politics. It's black and white, and I do storytelling, because I realized that one thing that I felt was missing in Italy when, opening a newspaper or a magazine, whenever there was a story related to politics, there wasn't really any storytelling, visually speaking. I mean, that is a tradition that you have in the United States. Storytelling, visual storytelling applied to politics. But in Italy, we were kind of missing that. We had a time where we had it in the 70s, 80s, but when I started this project, I wasn't really seeing those kinds of images. I would see only, pretty bad portraits or, images that weren't really telling the story. And so I went to Tiziana Faraoni, who is the photo editor of L'Espresso, and said, this is what I do. And we were having elections in early 2013. Very important elections. So these were the first elections after the technical government of Monti. And it was the first time Italians were called to vote after Berlusconi's previous last government, before he resigned. And she had this brilliant idea of assigning 2 photographers for these elections. One that would cover central and southern Italy. So basically, I started this project when I started this project, and then I got this assignment for L'Espresso, who financed the very start of the project for about a month. And then we had inconclusive elections. And then that's when I decided that I really wanted to continue this, because the country was unstable. We had a populist movement that entered the stage, and we really didn't know in which direction the country was going, politically speaking. And yeah, so I went on for many years, and I had to stop a few times because it was a little bit overwhelming. And but now I'm kind of coming to an end. I think I still have one more year of work probably before then publishing finally this book that I've been postponing for quite some time.
Can I stop you for a second? And can you go back on this slideshow? Can you go back to that picture of the woman on the sofa? Because we're seeing almost entirely pictures of men here. I'm curious who this woman is.
So I took this picture during the campaign for the elections of the mayor of Rome. This was in 2013. And so there were a lot of small events organized around the city. And one of the women that were running for the city council organized this event for Mother's Day. And so what you're seeing here is a Mother's Day related event where the mayor, who was running for re-election, was invited. He eventually never showed up to this event, but I did go there. I found this event, I think it was on Facebook, and just showed up. And I mean, the scene just looked like everything, but nothing related to, you know, Mother's Day. And when I saw this woman and the attitude this man had towards this woman and her makeup, I mean, I just stopped there and took this picture. I mean, I really love this picture because, I mean, it's I think it really says how sometimes, you know, events that are there, that are made to promote this, you know, something that theoretically could be a good cause. I mean, sometimes they're promoted and the people that attend those events, you know, really don't have anything to do with that cause. I mean, everything was done, you know, to bring votes for that councilwoman, who, by the way, wasn't elected to the council of the city of Rome, and that mayor wasn't reelected. But yeah, that's the story behind.
Okay, you can
Mother's
start.
Day.
you can start the slideshow again. So, you know, just thinking about that picture and all of them, really. I mean, I want to talk to you about populism and that content that's in the pictures, but also, I mean, since we stopped on that picture and it's so cinematic, as all of this work is just like powerfully cinematic, by which I think I mean that there's a sense of drama, there's a sense of character location, you know, and the space of drama. And I'm curious about, you know, there's I feel like some influence of like Magnum reportage photographers. I'm wondering if there are any particular ones that are influences, but even more than that, I'm curious about the influence of film and which filmmakers, because I'm myself a huge fan of Italian filmmakers of the 60s, late 50s, 60s, but I'm curious who you think influenced your sense of the cinematic the most.
So, I mean,
like this one.
Well, you're totally right about the Magnum photographers. I think I grew up with with the Magnum photographers, and I decided to become a documentary photographer because of the books and the images that, you know, all the Magnum photographers produce. Probably the main reason why I decided to study documentary photography at, you know, at ICP. In terms of the influence that I have, generally speaking, but also specifically for this project, one of the main photographers that I grew up with, because I'm Sicilian, is Letizia Battaglia. So she, for those of you who are not aware who she is, she photographed the mafia wars in Sicily and Palermo in the early, mainly in the early 80s. Stylistically, also, like I've always been fascinated by Ouija. And in terms of filmmakers, I mean, I'm a fan of Pasolini and the documentary work he did across Italy. There's a book that's been published a few years ago called Storie d'amore. So yeah, neorealism, Italian neorealism has been an influence. I love Antonioni. So yeah, there are, of course, influences, I guess, in my work, because those are all, you know, authors that that I've always loved.
What about the Italian Americans, Scorsese and Coppola?
Oh yeah, well, of course, yeah. How not to mention that? Well, I grew up in Brooklyn in the '80s, from the age of 2 to 7 years old, and I lived in Bensonhurst, the Italian American neighborhood, and yeah, the Martin Scorsese. Actually, I'm going to say it Italian, Martin Scorsese. I love those films. I can totally relate to not the violence, because I've never lived that kind of violence, but just the way Scorsese and that generation of filmmakers, you know, told the story of Italian Americans. And so I've mentioned a lot of filmmakers and photographers and writers that worked a lot, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and less contemporary photographers. And I think yes, this has influenced me, but I think one of the goals that I had with this project was that I wanted these images to seem timeless, because the idea behind this project is that, yes, historically, I'm taking like one slice of Italian history, whatever happened politically from 2013 up to today. But my idea is that history kind of repeats itself, and history is cyclical, and politics, especially, at least in Italy, is cyclical. So what we're seeing now, and what we saw with the rise of populist movements in the past 8 years or so, is similar to kind of what happened when Berlusconi entered the stage in 1994. I mean, back then we didn't really call him.
Stop you one second.
Yeah.
It's not moving again. But this image, before you change that, this image is so amazing. It's one of my favorites. It's like that constellation, that group of men, looks like something out of Rembrandt. It's so, I was saying cinematic before, now I would have to say painterly, but okay, so back to the slideshow and this work you're saying as a kind of historical narrative.
Yes. And yeah, one of the goals that that I had with this project was to render these images, this project, kind of timeless. Like, I would like whoever sees this project, and once it will become a book, to look at these images and not really understand if these were shot between 2013 and 2023, or in the 90s or the 60s, or in the future, because I think that history and the history of politics kind of is cyclical. It does repeat itself. I mean, the protagonists, the performers change, the policies might change, but the dynamics are kind of really the same. I mean, it is repetitive. Berlusconi was not considered back then a populist, but he kind of was like he was a populist. Mussolini was a populist. So the form changes, but the dynamics of how politics happen kind of do remain the same.
And the media has come into it more. And I mean, can you talk about that, about maybe the aspect of comedy and TV as a kind of injection into the media sense of some of these characters, maybe? Do you know what I mean by comedy? I mean, I'm thinking about Trump. I'm thinking also in Italy, the comedian, the 5-star comedian who had a blog and so on.
Absolutely. One thing that really struck me when I first started this project, and I've been I mean, I haven't counted the number of rallies I've been to, but I would assume, I don't know, maybe 100, maybe, I don't know, maybe more than that. But with the Five Stars movement, which is, you know, the populist movement that entered the stage in 2013, the co-founder of this movement is Beppe Grillo, and he's a comedian. He was a comedian that was on national TV in the 80s. So Italians really knew him. And one thing that struck me during his rallies was that yes, there was content in, you know, whatever he would tell the public. So there was, you know, there was a conversation about policy during his rallies. But one thing that I really noticed was his ability to really play with people's emotions. And because he was a TV star, he was a comedian, he really knew how to do that. I mean, he could, you know, make people laugh and a minute later make them cry, and or make them angry. And, you know, just playing with people's emotions like that, people, you know, would be just mesmerized by Beppe Grillo. And then yes, he did, you know, surround himself with young not politicians, like young people who had no experience in politics, but he was really the leader, and he was the one person. That's him in the photo that you're seeing here on the left, and on the right is the co-founder who is now dead, Gianroberto Casaleggio. He really knew how to play with that. And the media, that's funny, because in the very beginning, when the Five Stars movement entered the stage, Italian media weren't allowed. They weren't given any access, you know, to the backstages. They wouldn't give interviews to the Italian media. They only would talk to foreign media. And at the beginning, a lot of the access that I gained backstage was because I simply spoke English. So I would, to gain access, like I would just cut through the rows of Italian journalists that were trying to get behind, you know, backstage. And at one huge rally in Rome in 2013, I arrived there and I just pretended to be a photographer who had just landed in Rome, arriving from New York, and working for a magazine. I made up the name of the magazine. And I did an American accent, which I'm able to do because I grew up so I don't have an Italian accent when I speak in English. And they just opened the doors like that. And that made me so mad at the time, because really they were giving access to media based on what passport you had in your pocket. And that was outrageous. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I did.
Yeah, you did. I mean, your work really dramatizes this dialectic between power brokers and audience, you know, people, the populace. And with power brokers, I think there's also this emphasis, like with the hands clasped behind the back, of, you know, a kind of protected secret deal, as you were just saying about talking about media access. And it's not a project about the mafia, but I know I saw a film recently by a young filmmaker about the mafia in Calabria, and it was, you know, instead of having this sort of visible, explicit crime scenes and situations that usually are in films about the mafia, it was all, the whole point was about how the the crime was so controlled and hidden and, you know, less visibly attached to violence. Would you agree with that in your observation of the way that it plays out?
So in terms, well, organized
I
crime,
mean, you know, in terms of like there being a more silent way of making money for the mafia.
well, yeah, I mean, violence, violence hasn't helped the mafia to achieve, you know, whatever interests they had, and they figured that out, you know, in the mid 90s, after the assassination of, you know, high figures, after the assassinations of magistrates and, you know, bombs they placed all across the country. And there was a response from the Italian state, a military response. And part of the mafia, I mean, there have been lots of arrests, trials. The majority of the people that, you know, were part of the mafia in the 80s and 90s are now in jail, and they're in jail for life. But there is the one part of the mafia that, you know, figured that, you know, that wasn't, you know, benefiting them anymore, you know, all those killings and that violence. So it did evolve. So it's not, the mafia is no longer what you would see in, you know, a Scorsese movie. It's not about, you know, beating people up with baseball bats if you're in New York, or placing bombs if you're in Sicily. They're no longer achieving their goals with those, with that kind of violence. Now it's, it has entered politics. Now it's getting its money from, you know, it's getting public money. I mean, it has infiltrated society in a way where, you know, you really can't distinguish, you know, what is organized crime and what is was not. And politics is, you know, kind of responsible for that as well. And this is something that has been actually been denounced by Beppe Grillo, you know, the comedian, before he started this movement, you know, in 2006, you know, in the 2000 he had a blog, and it was called Il Blog di Beppe Grillo, and it was one of the world ranking blogs in the year 2000s, one of the most read blogs, because he was talking about things that, you know, really nobody else was talking about publicly, meaning, you know, people that were sitting in the parliament or in the Senate that had been charged, that had criminal organized crime affiliations, but that still, you know, were candidates and that were elected and that were sitting in the parliament. And he was the only one, you know, really talking about that. And, you know, when I was a university student, I would read the blog because it was a source of interesting stories. And so the blog was a way of gaining, spreading, gaining, subscribers and public, and then it transformed in the movement, in this 5 Stars movement. So it was a really long process. So, Italians were kind of aware of what was happening. They were kind of fed up with the system, and the movement, the populist movement, kind of, feeded itself with that anger. And I really can understand why that happened. But one thing is to have a seat in the parliament and be a watchdog for other politicians, but one thing is to actually make policies. And I felt that the movement, because it was populist, it didn't really have any ideology. It didn't really have a concrete, policy, just kind of changes depending on where the wind changes. So yeah.
I mean, do you think, you know, I think post-war Italy became extremely bureaucratic. Today, it's a really bureaucratic country. And I think that the extent of that bureaucracy keeps it from competing globally. Nepotism and bureaucracy. And in a way, bureaucracy can be so frustrating if you're dealing with any kind of life problem and you're trying to get help or assistance and you have to deal with their bureaucracy. So do you think that that has, in a sense, paved the way for this kind of populism?
Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the reasons where why populism has been so fascinating for so many people, but that they haven't really solved that issue, you know, anyway. I mean, they've done many promises, you know, in the past 8 years. I mean, they've kept a few of those promises, but we're still kind of are the country that we were 8 years ago. And I think that, you know, the result of people now are realizing that. And as a matter of fact, you know, in the polls, the Movimento 5 Stelle, the 5 Stars movement, or the Lega, which came after, which is another party, are kind of dropping now. So what will be interesting to see is what will happen in the next elections. And the next elections are scheduled to be in 2023. But we're in Italy, so I'm not expecting that to happen in 2023, because I mean the average duration of a government in Italy since post World War II has been 2.5 years instead of 5. So I think in early 2022 we'll know where we're heading, because we're voting for the new president of the republic, and that is already a reason for a crisis. So depending how things go in January, we will see if we'll have early elections, which I assume will happen.
Do you think that the example of Trump and his denial about the election and his attempted coup, do you think that that has had an impact on the Italians negatively, so that they would veer possibly away from that kind of populist, or do you think it's encouraged them towards it?
I'm really not sure how to answer that question. It was shocking to see what happened in the States, you know, Capitol Hill, and I think people here in Italy were kind of shocked of what happened. Matteo Salvini, which is the other populist here in Italy, was an admirer, I think he still is, of Trump, and he called for fraud for what was happening in the States. But honestly, I don't know how Italians would react, and if, you know, we had controversial elections. When it comes to politics, I feel that I mean, we never had any revolutions in Italy. I mean, we're not France. We kind of go with power, you know, whoever is in power. What I'm seeing and what could happen in Italy, and that it could be similar to what happened in Washington. And what I'm seeing, what I find is similar nowadays, is the whole anti-vaccination, anti-sanitary pass movement. which is kind of getting violent in Italy. It's growing in numbers. So I haven't followed that as a photographer really, but I'm kind of paying attention to that because that scares me. I mean, that really scares me. They occupied a labor union, assaulted a labor union in Rome, a historical headquarters of a labor union in Rome. I think it was last month, a month and a half ago, and that was worrying. That really scared me.
Yeah, I mean, I was just in Switzerland and the Netherlands, and I was surprised at the vaccine resistance in both of those places. Not so much in the cities, but in the countryside, there's like a virulent kind of resistance.
Well, I was kind of sorry for interrupting. I was kind of scared in the early years, let's say between 2013 and 2015, when the Five Stars movement entered the stage in Italy, because there was a lot of anger in the squares, and there was also a lot of anger towards journalists, because the journalists were being accused of not telling the truth and not reporting the truth, and being either biased or politically were having political agendas, and I don't see that anymore with in political rallies. Like, I'm not really afraid of going to a political rally and being assaulted. That did happen in the past. But what I'm seeing something very similar with with the anti-vaccination movement. They are violent, and they are really against journalists. So that is what is happening similar.
So Gianni, let's stop the slideshow and go to just faces and see whether there are any audience questions.
I have a quick question. Gianni, you were saying at the beginning that you made up the name of some magazine to get access, because they didn't know who you were, so you were able to, use your American accent. Now you have been doing this for quite a while. Do people now know you? I mean, do some of the politicians recognize you, or are there so many photographers and so many people that you don't have to worry about that? Like, are they like, there he is again, or that hasn't happened yet?
No. I'm not.
Oh, that's good.
I'm not worried about politicians recognizing me at all. I feel that actually there is, and then there's a lack of awareness in politicians about what photographers can do.
Okay. That's good.
One example is when I followed the mayor of Rome, who was running for re-election in 2013, and I called his press secretary and said that I was doing a project about politics, and I think it would have been a good idea to follow him backstage instead of being part of the media circus, because I wanted to have some. If I had access, I could do a better job. And I told them that, I had studied in the States, that, I was a photojournalist, and, we could have, really cool images if they gave me access. And it was like, yeah, sure, come on. So I was in the car with them. They were like, running in their cars, going above speed limits. They were like doing a whole series of things that they shouldn't have been doing in front of a journalist, but they did them. And nothing. What happened is that I went on the cover of L'Espresso magazine right before election day in Rome, and it was a picture of him from behind, with his head kind of like down. He kind of like looked. We couldn't see his face, but you could recognize him. And there was like it was a title called Roma Caput, and he went on TV with the magazine and with my picture on the cover of the magazine, saying that it was disgusting that the media was doing that But and I was, when the magazine came out and when he was going live on TV, I was actually waiting in the city council for one of his last press conferences. And I noticed what was happening because someone in front of me had an iPad live of him complaining with the magazine. And I was like, oh my God, like they're gonna kill me. Like I'm in the lion's mouth here. Like like, I'm done. And the press secretary came in. He kind of looked at me like, I know you, but I'm not sure who you are. And that's when I realized, I think there is really a lack of awareness of, what you can do with pictures. So I was like, okay, that's fine, good for me. I can continue my job.
That's really interesting. My goodness.
In my experience, so I'm not sure how things are. I don't know. I'll tell you if things evolve differently, in the future. But this has been my experience. I'm part of the media circus, generally speaking. I'm not famous. I'm just one of the zillions of photographers out there.
Since you teach, I'm curious, we've seen so much of your work. What do you emphasize as a teacher? What's your thing? Mine, I tell my students, I don't know if this is true, I tell my students, mine is space, is like mise en scène, depth of space between figures and rooms. It's all that is space. What is yours?
So I don't do that much teaching. I mean, the only class that I've been teaching recently was, a lighting class on StrudelmediaLive. So I would call it's a technical workshop. And one thing that I've told my students over and over the past few weeks, we just finished, the last session a few days ago, was like, yes, I am teaching you all of these, how you can achieve certain, lighting patterns and effects and all of that. But, the one thing that I always repeat is there is really no right or wrong. I mean, yes, if you want to change the color temperature, you can use color gels, but, you don't necessarily need to do that. You only do that if it's something that if that helps you convey a message. So try to, yes, all the technicalities are important. They're like tools that will help you achieve your goal, but really learn your ABC and then just forget about it. Just forget the grammar, then just really think about what you want to do. When I do work, when I've done, portfolio reviews or critiques, what I try to emphasize is really how, for example, for this project, for me, this project was not about really necessarily telling a story. It was about what the feeling I had and how I felt about this subject matter and how to express that feeling, and what was the best way of, what was the best style, what were the best techniques of, expressing that. So it's just really listen to your guts. And then, yes, I do editorial work, and in that case, I'm working with a journalist, and I'm working on a story and on the narrative. So I'm kind of putting feelings on the side, I'm just being a professional photographer doing its own job, and I know how to do that. But whenever I'm working on personal projects, it's really about why am I deciding to do this? Why do I feel the need to do this? And if I don't feel the need to do this, if I don't have that feeling, I guess I just won't do it. So,
well, speaking of that, since your work Politico is about politics and politicians, what is the personal connection? Was anyone in your family a politician, or were you impacted in any specific way by a political decision that,
Well, so I'm not going to go too personal in that. So no, I don't have any politician in my family. But I do feel that as a Sicilian, as a Sicilian, and growing up in an Italian American neighborhood in Brooklyn in the 80s, and in a small town in Sicily, where there was a organized crime presence. I feel that and nobody from my family was or is part of that, but I feel that being part of that community, that I kind of suffered the consequences of policymaking, and that there has been also a lot of propaganda made for the benefits of others. So I'm thinking of Giuliani in New York, and how he started his career. I'm thinking of other policymakers, politicians in Sicily. And I feel that, that has impacted me as being part of those communities. And so, when I started this project, I think that I had some repressed anger, and I needed to allow myself to spit it out. But then I realized, okay, I'm also, I don't want, because I'm a photographer and because I'm part of the media, by doing that, I don't want to make propaganda myself. I'm in a very dangerous position. And so I kind of evolved, from that. And over the years, like I had, feelings that have changed, I have, more recently, I'm much more, not only more recently, but just only a few months after I started the project, I became a little bit more analytical. And, but yeah, I mean, the reason why I started this project was kind of that feeling,
Gianni, we actually have a couple of questions coming
Yes.
in. So the first one is, some of your projects are in color, but these all in black and white. And is it a purely aesthetic choice, or does the subject matter decide? And then the other question that came in was, how can you spend so much time with such ugly people? So there's also a really good one about the Vatican. Yeah. Why don't you do those two, and we'll get to that one then. Okay.
So yes, I do have projects in color, and I have this one in in black and white. I would say that I decide to shoot either in black and white or color, depending on how I imagine that project. And so, yes, the subject matter kind of dictates that, I would say, in part, and the other part is just me pre-visualizing what that project and what that work will be about. So in the early stages of my career, when this has happened, it didn't happen that often, but it did happen a few times, and with people in power, let's say, like in the photography world, or at least in Italy, where I was kind of critiqued for going from black and white to color, and from color to black and white. They said, no, you have to stick with one thing. And I'm happy I never listened to that advice. Maybe that's counterintuitive, and that's maybe something that you shouldn't be doing, because you need to have a really defined style as a photographer, which I feel I do have, depending if I shoot in color or in black and white. But the reality is that I started my career after 2008, and we are influenced by so much artwork, so many photographers. There are so many things that I love out there. And why can't I just kind of take all those influences and express them in whatever way I feel is the best way of communicating that story, that project, or that, you know, an art piece or whatever. So, so yeah, the subject matter kind of does dictate that, and I have no problem doing that.
So, and here's another one. Could you talk a bit about the relationship the Vatican has had with the political world that you so aptly and beautifully pictured, and in particular, the populist politics of the present?
So I haven't really covered the relationships between the Vatican and politics. Many rallies I've been to, I've seen, there's one picture in particular where there's like one priest, you know, inaugurating a stadium 2 days before re-elections for, you know, the mayor who was running for re-election. So that is, of course, there are things that I have noticed, but I wouldn't generalize too much about the relationships between. Yes, there is a bad relationship between some people from the Vatican and politics, but there are also, you know, priests that are activists and that are doing great things out there, who, you know, started, you know, anti-mafia associations and but yeah, I didn't really specifically cover that kind of relationship in my project. I'm aware of it. I did photograph it sometimes, but that was not the focus of the project. I probably would need another 20 years to do that.
Talking about another 20 years. So you said you were working on a book, and this project to me feels like it could go on for, you know, another decade and then another decade. So will the book be volume 1 and then you will continue, or what's your plan?
I don't think I will have the energy to do a volume 2. I think the whole point of the project is to take one slice of Italian history and, you know, put it out there and say, be aware of what happened and what could happen, what has happened already in the past, what has happened during the time I was there, and what could happen in the future. But I feel that, you know, after almost 10 years of doing this, you know, there now has come a time where I need to wrap this up and just put it out there and move on. There are so many other things that I want to do, stories, projects, ideas that I have, and that I feel that that I really cannot dedicate myself entirely to unless I wrap this one project.
Yeah, that makes sense. I completely hear you.
Yeah,
I think that's a good place for us to stop and wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gianni. That was just fantastic. And
thank you so much. It was great. I love this.
And thanks everybody again for coming and for being here, and Anya and Edward for hosting.
Thank you so much to everybody. Thanks for being here. And yeah, stay tuned for more photo talks, and stay tuned for Gianni's book and Alan's exhibition. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to being here today.